This video is going to be very different from my usual review content. The script for this was originally written in 2020 and was a request paid for by one of my patrons, Noah. In the 3.5 years since then, my motivation for this project slowly deteriorated and the scope of it quickly became overwhelming. By this point, the script has aged quite a bit and it's not up to my current standards, but redoing the entire video from scratch would simply be too much work and I would never get the video out. I can't even get the video editing itself done on this behemoth, so I've decided to upload the video as is. The first 10 minutes or so are fully edited, but the rest of the video will contain unedited gameplay rather than my usual spliced clips. If you tend to listen to my videos while doing something else instead of watching them, it won't make a difference, but for the rest of you, try to approach this one as more of a podcast-like episode. Apologies if that's disappointing to some of you, but it got the approval of Noah, and if I don't let go of this video, I'll never get it done, and I really need to move on to other things. Also, due to the age of this video's production, the gameplay I recorded was limited to 720p 30fps, as the Vita version was the only version accessible to me at the time. That's also not going to be an issue for those just listening to the video, but given my current standard is 4K 60fps, I figured it was worth mentioning. All that said, this video will contain full spoilers for the entirety of this game, so be aware of that if you haven't played it yet, especially once we get into the story section. Sorry again for the disappointment here, and please enjoy the rest of my Danganronpa review as it was originally written, aside from a couple of changes made later in the video's production, which will be noted as they come up. Danganronpa sees you play as Makoto Naegi, a high school student who gets accepted into Hope's Peak Academy. Hope's Peak is a special high school that you can't get into unless you're already in high school and are specifically selected to attend by the school itself. This means that only the most talented students will ever get into the school, such as Leon, the ultimate baseball star, or Toko, the ultimate writing prodigy. Some of them are a little on the weirder side, such as Yasuhiro, the ultimate clairvoyant, or Hifumi, the ultimate fanfic creator, but I'll get more into the characters themselves later. So, what exactly is Makoto's talent? Well, he doesn't really have one. He was only scouted by the school after being randomly chosen, making him the ultimate lucky student. Other than that, Makoto is completely normal, boring, and uninteresting. More on that later. When he arrives at Hope's Peak, he steps inside, only to black out in the middle of the hallway. He wakes up in a classroom with nothing but his pamphlet. However, the classroom itself is locked down, with metal plates covering the windows and a security camera watching over. He heads to the main entrance to find 14 other students waiting there for him, many of which he recognized from the research he did into the class he was being accepted into prior to leaving for Hope's Peak. After they introduce each other, an announcement is made, beckoning the students to the gym. Here they meet Monokuma, the school's mascot. However, he is no normal mascot. He is an animatronic that can basically do whatever he wants. He informs the students that they are now trapped in Hope's Peak, being forced to spend the rest of their lives there. When the students question him and demand he let them go, he introduces them to the killing game. In order to leave the school, one must graduate. Graduation is achieved by murdering another student, and getting away with it by convincing everyone else that one of the other students is to blame in a class trial. If they succeed, they get to leave the school alone and everyone else is executed. But if they get caught, they get executed, and the rest of the students continue their lives at Hope's Peak. Of course, the group doesn't react kindly to this, with most of them assuming it's all some kind of sick joke. But as the days go by and Monokuma makes it clear that this is all very real to them, there's much debate between the student body. Eventually, tragedy strikes, murders take place, and it's your job to investigate and help solve the murders so you can continue your life in the hopes of finding another way out. So that's the general setup for the game. Gameplay is split into 3 distinct sections: free time, investigations, and class trials. Free time is very simple. You can roam around the school looking through new rooms as they unlock and find tokens in random spots to spend on a shop for presents. The presents can be given to other students when you spend time with them. That is the main purpose of free time. You seek out a student, choose to spend time with them, and then you have a little conversation. Like I said before, you can choose to give them a present, and they'll react differently depending on whether they like it or not. And this increases an invisible friendship stat. As your friendship with each character increases, you'll unlock skills that can be used in the class trials. and they're actually pretty useful, but definitely not necessary. However, this friendship value being invisible presents a problem, since you don't know when you're going to unlock something and some characters just don't have that much dialogue, so talking to them multiple times and being met with literally nothing can feel like a big waste of time. Plus, you only get 2 of these opportunities to talk to students each in-game day, sometimes just 1 if there's an important plot point going on that day, and with some of the characters dying earlier on in the story, you just don't get a chance to talk to them much. Of course, on your first time through, you don't know who's gonna die or when, so it can be really demotivating when someone dies and you realize you never got the chance to talk to them or get their skill, so the whole system feels kind of half-baked. In fact, I didn't even realize the skills were tied to a friendship value because it was hidden. I thought the skills were just unlocked after talking to each person once, but then some of them didn't, and it was all just very confusing. You can choose to skip the free time and just go straight to bed and get on with the story, and honestly, if I weren't playing this for the review and really trying to give the game a chance, I wouldn't even bother half the time. There are really only a few characters I'd go out of my way to talk to anyway, and considering free time all but disappears after Chapter 3, in retrospect, it kind of felt like a big waste of time. The gameplay is really simple. It just boils down to opening up the map, choosing who you want to talk to, finding them, walking to wherever they are, and pressing X until you get the dialogue. I can at least praise the game for having a teleport option to make travel quicker, but even then, I wish you could teleport to any room instead of just specific points in the main halls of each floor. Still, I'm thankful the option is there. Anyway, let me circle back to the tokens that you buy the presents with. Well, I use the term buy lightly here. It's set up more like the trophy machine in Melee, where the chances of getting a new present decrease the more new ones that you get, but you can increase those chances by putting multiple coins in at once. Personally, I'd rather just be able to buy them from a list, with certain items costing more or less than others, but this system is fine too. The problem I have is with the tokens themselves. You get a bunch of them from doing well in the class trials. The higher you score, the more tokens you get. That's all fine and good, but you can also get them from inspecting random shit in each room. At first it's like, oh cool, I got a token for that, but then you start tediously inspecting the same shit in every single room, like the metal plates or the monitors or security cameras, and it just gets tiring. I'm not sure what compelled me to do this for so long when I wasn't even bothering with the presents much anyway, but I just stopped caring about halfway through the game. It's not a huge deal, but honestly I'd rather them just be rewards for higher rankings on the trials with a slightly higher payout to compensate. Once a murder happens, you must investigate the crime scene and look throughout the school for clues. Fair warning, this is where comparisons to Ace Attorney are going to become very common, as that's my closest reference for this kind of game. These are basically the same as the investigations in Ace Attorney, where the story will automatically move you to the trial once you've combed through everything and have all the evidence you need to make it through it. In all honesty, there's very little to talk about here. The important locations are marked on the map, and it won't even let you leave a room until you've checked everything you need in it. It's really handholdy in that way, but honestly, the investigation is a bit of a formality to get you familiar with the murder, so I don't really mind it. If anything, it makes it easier to breeze through it than in Ace Attorney, since you can more easily tally everything in your head. The only issue I ever ran into was during Case 4, where you're supposed to check this magazine shelf to find a dying message in one of the magazines, but only the second time you visit the rec room. I had checked the magazine shelf the first time around and found nothing, so when I came back and couldn't progress for some unknown reason, I had to look up a guide, only to find out it was the one thing I hadn't double-checked, thinking nothing of it since nothing is what I got from it the first time. After checking it, the game told me that Kyoko said there was a new clue on the magazine rack among other places, but I don't remember her mentioning the magazine rack, and talking to her didn't trigger that dialogue to reappear. It's possible I just missed it and this is on me, but still, it was a pretty annoying setback. But like I said, these are mostly really easy and kind of a formality, but they are at least interesting, even more so than their equivalents in Ace Attorney in some aspects. That brings us to the class trials. These are split into 4 different sections. The most common ones, non-stop debate, are like Ace Attorney's cross-examinations. The students all debate on a certain topic relating to the case, and you have to point out contradictions by matching evidence to their words. Where in Ace Attorney you can scroll through the text boxes at your own pace, but you have to choose from all of the evidence in the case, non-stop debates have you point a crosshair at the screen to shoot their words in real time with truth bullets. Truth bullets are the evidence, but unlike in Ace Attorney where you can choose from any piece of evidence on any statement, here you can only choose from a select few pieces of evidence and can only shoot them at the highlighted phrases. As the game goes on, they get harder with more truth bullets, more false statements, and white noise getting in the way of your shots. I don't know why they call it white noise when the phrases are purple, but whatever. More truth bullets and false statements I can deal with, but the white noise is such a pain in the ass. You can shoot them down with the crosshair to get them out of the way, but by the time you aim at it and try to get over to the actual statement to shoot your truth bullet at it, the sentence has likely gone away, and you have to scroll all the way through the entire conversation just to get another chance at shooting it, just to see if you're even correct. There is a fast forward button for that, but it really only goes so far when you end up missing multiple times in a row. You can somewhat mitigate this with your concentration, denoted by these stars in the top right, but it drains super fast and is pretty hard to get used to. I didn't really get a good grip on it until the last 2 cases of the whole game. On top of all that, you also have the ability to absorb phrases from the debate and use those as bullets, but they're only a one-time use, so if you miss, you have to cycle all the way through the conversation again to absorb it and then try your shot again. This system of having to shoot your bullets at the statements in real time is a pain in the fucking ass, and I hated it. I even ran into a glitch where the bullet hit the statement on the last possible frame or something, so it only half detected my shot, lighting up as incorrect but not punishing me for it. At first, I thought I got away with it without having to sit through the cutscene of being told I was wrong, but it was actually the correct answer all along. Then it happened again on the very next debate. This system is just so annoying and tedious, it's garbage. I never got used to it all the way up to the final case. Even without the jank, I still think the system is just worse than Ace Attorney's due to having so much more limited options for evidence and statements. It makes it way easier to brute force your way through them as opposed to an Ace Attorney where you'd have to try every piece of evidence on every profile and every statement, meaning you're encouraged to use your brain and actually figure it out. Ace Attorney also does a much better job of stumping you with difficult logic puzzles, whereas most of the time in Danganronpa, I figured everything out on the fly. The game is just way too easy in general, and being able to easily brute force anything I did have trouble with only made it that much easier. It still has its fair share of tricky situations and aha moments, but they're a lot less common than in any of the Ace Attorney games I've played. So yeah, overall, non-stop debates are pretty flawed, and I'm not really a fan of how they work. But if you think that sounds bad, just wait until you see the other parts of the class trials. They're all completely pointless wastes of time. Instead of just choosing an option from a list in response to certain dialogue prompts like you would sometimes, how about a game of Hangman? In Hangman's Gambit, you fill in a word hangman style by shooting letters as they fly across the screen. There was only one instance where I didn't immediately know what the word was, and that's because schizo isn't a real word. So figuring out the word isn't ever a puzzle, and the actual shooting of the letters just boils down to waiting for the next letter to show up and pressing X a few times. What is the point of this? I seriously cannot think of one reason for this to exist over just choosing from a list of options for the right response, or even just doing a non-stop debate instead. I would genuinely rather do the non-stop debate over this utterly pointless waste of time. And that's not even the worst of it. Next up is the bullet time battles, a rhythm minigame where you press buttons to the beat in order to target phrases and shoot them down. These phrases are always just random nonsense, so they don't really matter. You're just doing this to lower their health bar. Once their health is drained, you can hit them with a truth bullet to refute their statement. You know, the same thing you can do in non-stop debates, but now with a stupid, pointless rhythm minigame before it. For one, there's way too much shit to keep track of. You have to press X to lock onto the statements as they appear, triangle to shoot them down, and square to reload your bullets, all to the beat of the song. As your combo increases, the tempo will change with no smooth transition whatsoever, throwing you off when it randomly decides to change tempo. Later bullet time battles also introduce multiple choices of truth bullets to refute their statement with at the end of the battle. So if you get the wrong one, or spend too long thinking about which one it is, or trying to switch to the correct one, you'll get fucked over and have to do more of the rhythm minigame to lower their health bar back down. On top of that, the enemy can enter something called nega time, which hides the beat meter, forcing you to keep time with your ears. This makes the tempo shifts even more jarring. It's not enough to make you lose one of these battles so long as you have a decent sense of rhythm. I never lost one throughout the whole game, but it's just really annoying. Allegedly, you can use your concentration meter to negate this a bit, allowing you to basically spam the buttons with no regard for the rhythm, but I tried this and nothing really happened, so I just never bothered with it. The bullet time battles are absolute garbage. Like the Hangman's Gambit, they're a completely pointless waste of time that could have easily been replaced with a list of choices to respond with, or just another non-stop debate. Unlike Hangman's Gambit, however, they can go on for multiple minutes and just waste your time with garbage, janky mechanics. Finally, there's the closing statement. At the end of each case, you'll have to put the story together in the style of a manga comic book, using circles from a list at the bottom to fill in the blank panels. At first, I didn't realize it read backwards like a manga and was really confused, but I quickly figured out what I was doing wrong. It's a bit weird they didn't flip it around for the English localization, but whatever, that's just a minor nitpick. These are kinda pointless, and gameplay-wise they're very simple, but it is pretty satisfying to see the whole case play out from start to finish in this cool-looking comic book style, so it gets a pass. I'm mixed on the non-stop baits. The Hangman Gambits are a complete waste of time. I fucking hate the bullet time battles, and the closing statements are alright. So, overall, Clash Trials are pretty disappointing. The trials are always the best part of the Ace Attorney games, but here they're bogged down by pointless additional mechanics. It really takes away from the satisfaction of figuring out the contradiction when you have to awkwardly aim your crosshair around or sit through one of the god-awful minigames just to present your evidence. The only other thing worth mentioning here is the extra side mode you unlock after beating the game, called Danganronpa, which is like an alternate reality beginning of the killing game, where Monokuma tasks you to build a bunch of backup Monokuma bots so he can begin the orientation without the danger of being taken apart and left defenseless. As soon as I saw this menu telling me to assign students to different roles to gather materials, I noped the fuck out. I was not about to waste another 10 hours on some mobile game looking shit. Seriously, this looks like it should be a spin-off mobile game. I just didn't even bother. At first, I thought the mode was going to be a non-canon alternate story, putting the same characters through the same story but with different murder cases. This actually would have really helped the game, as its skill tree system encourages replayability, but once you know the answers to all the murders, replaying the game just to get a little bit more free time is a complete chore. Sure, there is a chapter select, so you could skip straight to free time, spend it all up, save your game, and then reload at the start of the chapter to do it again, but that's kind of boring. Having an alternate campaign to give you more time with some of the characters who died earlier on would have been a really engaging way to further encourage replayability. I know that's kind of asking for a lot, but I'm not going to bother replaying it otherwise. There's just not a good enough reason to. Unfortunately, this side mode is not an alternate campaign, though it apparently does offer you more time to get to know the characters better. Whether you can fill out your skill tree in this mode and apply it to repeat playthroughs, I'm not sure, but if you're getting the further character development from it already, what reason do you have to replay the regular campaign anyway? The game really needed a way to get more development for its characters, more on that later, but the way they went about it is just not good. Overall, the gameplay is really not good. Searching for tokens is a chore, the friendship values and therefore Clash Trial skill tree are plagued by an invisible meter, which makes it so you don't know if what you're doing is even helpful half the time. The investigations are fine if a bit too railroaded and mindless, and the Clash Trials, which should be the most fun part of the game, are held back by janky mechanics, awful minigames, and tedious time wasters. It's like they looked at Ace Attorney and thought, you know what this needs? A bunch of stupid bullshit that it doesn't need. It's like the opposite of streamlining, and this game came out in 2010, well after Ace Attorney had established itself and set a precedent for these kinds of murder mystery games. I'm sorry for the constant comparisons, but like I said before, it's the only frame of reference I have, and Danganronpa absolutely pales in comparison. For the most part, the gameplay really did not impress me, but it has just enough good moments for me to cut it some slack. Whew, okay, let's take a break from ranting and talk about the soundtrack. It's good. There are some pretty good tunes, like the title theme, Monokuma's theme, and the investigation theme, but for the most part, it's not very memorable. Most of it is very atmospheric, and it does do atmospheric music well, but fails at making the pieces simultaneously atmospheric and catchy, in the way that games like Donkey Kong Country do so elegantly. I guess it is a lot harder to do that while keeping a darker tone, so I'm not going to be too hard on it for this. Like I said, it does its job just fine, but it's nothing amazing. I've heard very good things about the soundtrack beforehand, so I gotta say I'm a little bit disappointed. The Case 5 and 6 investigation theme is a banger, but it's about the only banger in the entire OST. I can give it credit for doing what it sets out to do and doing it decently enough, but it's not really something I'll be returning to for future listening anytime soon. Sound design in general is okay, but to compare to Ace Attorney again, it really lacks that oomph that makes Ace Attorney so charming and memorable. I mean, you tell me what's more iconic, this or this? Ace Attorney wins this one by a mile if you ask me. What this game features that Ace Attorney doesn't, however, is full voice acting. Well, sort of. The Clash Trials are fully voice acted, but outside of that, the characters will spout some 1 or 2 word phrases. This gets really annoying, especially when they start reusing the same phrases over and over, and some of the VAs aren't so great. Most of them are pretty good, but a lot of them play way too hard into their character's one big personality trait. For example, Hiro is the token stupid character, so he just sounds like a stoner. Always. His only emotion outside from neutral is just screaming or crying. Kyoko almost never emotes with her voice at all, with the excuse being that her character is always hiding her emotions. Toko's stuttering is just annoying, and her other personality, Genocide Jill, is just fucking obnoxious, constantly screaming and howling. Sakura has a constant deterministically strong tone, if you get what I mean, and only ever emotes past that when she's yelling. These aren't really examples of bad voice acting, but more so bad voice directing. The actors fit their roles fine, they just aren't really given much to work with. They're convincing enough that it's usually not that distracting or anything, but overall I'm not impressed with the performances. The only outright bad voice acting is Makoto's. He has this really annoying, whiny voice that makes me want to punch him in the face. Fortunately, he doesn't ever really talk outside of the class trials, at least not with a voice actor. But when he does, it is unbearable to listen to. The best voice acting in the game would definitely go to either Byakuya or Monokuma. Byakuya keeps a direct tone, but shows a good range of emotion, from angry to annoyed to shocked to confident, and his voice actor fits the role perfectly. He really sells the character. As for Monokuma, he is a blast to listen to. He's got this upbeat, cheery, high-pitched voice, but it's always undercut by the dark tones of his dialogue, making for an excellent contrast. This even fits his character design, and the voice acting is one of the many reasons why I love Monokuma as a character, but I'll get more into that a little bit later. He even emotes decently well, like he'll put on a clearly fake sad voice and jump right back to normal when no one reacts with any sympathy at all. It's hilarious. So while I'm not impressed with the voice acting overall, it does have its highlights, and the same can be said about the soundtrack and sound design in general. While the audio side of things might be fine, when it comes to the visuals, I'm actually really split. I've made it very clear in the past on Twitter how much I dislike the character designs of Danganronpa, just from the impressions I've gotten from seeing them posted by my friends. And after playing it, I haven't really changed my mind much here. I don't think the art style is outright bad, as it does some things really well, but human character design is just not one of those things. Monokuma looks great, with his striking design of being white on one half with an innocent-looking face, and black on the other half with an evil red eye and long toothy smile. This more simplistic approach works really well, and his design even complements his character's themes of hope versus despair. It's a really clever design that I like quite a lot. The environments all look pretty good too, with this striking lighting in the hallways and a really neat looking pop-up book style inside the rooms. The mix of 2D and 3D environments is a little jarring, but I like the 2D style inside the regular rooms, and you couldn't really roam freely if the halls weren't 3D, so I can forgive it. What I don't really understand though is why they chose to use 2D sprites billboarded in a 3D environment. That's when stuff starts to look really out of place, especially the characters. Not only that, but these light.pngs up here have really bad pop-in the longer hallways, which was a little distracting. Along with that, some of the sprites just look really low res, and considering this is the HD remaster, there's really no excuse for such ugly looking assets. Hold up, hey, Editor ahbeef here. I forgot to put this in the script, so I wanted to butt in and say that it may be of importance which version of the game I played. See, back when I recorded the gameplay for this review, I didn't have my fancy new computer yet, and my old laptop had issues with recording software, so the only way I was able to record footage was through my Elgato, as the encoding is handled on the Elgato itself rather than through the recording software. That said, the PC version was out of the question for me, and I don't own a PS4 or PS Vita. Fortunately, my friend happens to own a PS TV, which is a lot easier to borrow than a PS4, so I'm playing this on the Vita version. The Vita version runs at 720p 30fps, and while the frame rate doesn't change regardless of which version you play, at least without mods, the PS4 and PC version can run at higher resolutions. That's why this video is only in 720p, by the way. While I may not be familiar with the Vita's library or the technical standards of the system, if it can run a fully 3D Uncharted game, there should be no reason this game needed pop-in on these light textures to keep a stable performance. I mean, the game is made up of low-poly 3D environments and low-res 2D textures, which again may be an issue specific to the Vita version, but I believe the Vita could do better. I just wanted to qualify that some of the technical aspects I criticized in this review may be due to the fact that I played it on Vita. Cool? Alright, back to the review. There were also a few visual bugs I encountered, such as the pop-in I mentioned earlier, the textures on these doors being laid incorrectly, this text box during the second class trial being mislabeled, and a grammatical error in this other text box. Those are really just nitpicks, but they were a little distracting, so I figured I'd point them out here. All of that I can forgive, but I just can't really say the same for the character designs. Aside from Monokuma, every single character just looks bad. They all have this weird thing going on with their eyes that just looks really off. It's hard to explain, but it just kind of makes me a bit uncomfortable to look at. Their hair and clothing also all look way too mangled. Everyone looks like they just rolled out of bed, save for Kyoko. They're also always in this really awkward looking neutral pose, and I know that's kind of a meme in the fan base, but I didn't really find it all that funny, just awkward and weird. The other big thing I don't like about the character designs is the color palettes. They all use these really dark, dingy colors that just look gross. I guess it's a stylistic choice meant to make the characters fit in with their environments more, but it just comes off as uncomfortable to look at. I know this is all very opinionated, and some will disagree and say that they love the art style, and that's fine, but this just really doesn't do it for me. It's a shame too, because the human character design holds back what would otherwise be a really cool, unique art style with neat-looking environments and lighting effects. That leaves us with the story. So, I'll leave my final spoiler warning here. I will be spoiling the overarching plot, specifics of each case, and details of every character in this review from here on out. So this is your last chance to turn back and experience the game fresh for yourself if you haven't already and are interested. Otherwise, I'll start with the characters. So once you wake up after arriving at Hope's Peak, you head to the entrance room and meet up with the rest of your classmates. Here you meet each of them, exchange some words, and learn their ultimate talents. Aside from Kyoko's, she just doesn't tell you. First up is Junko. She's the ultimate fashionista, and as such, she thinks she's above the law. Of course, this gets her killed in the very beginning of the game, as violence against the headmaster Monokuma is against school regulations. At the very least, she's not annoyingly arrogant, but her one personality trait lasts her about as long as she's in the story. Don't worry, I will circle back to this much later. Next is Sayaka. She only lasts 3 days before becoming the first murder victim. She's the ultimate pop sensation and the lead singer of an idol band. She has a very strong connection to her friends in her group and talks to Makoto about them frequently. She also has this weird gimmick of guessing what Makoto is going to say and joking that she's psychic. This never really goes anywhere, and it's more just weird than funny, so I'm not sure why they gave her this running gag. Anyway, she connects to Makoto early on, revealing that she recognized him from her middle school and tells a story that they shared there. This buildup of a connection between the two leads into a betrayal, where Sayaka asks Makoto to switch rooms with her after claiming she heard someone banging on her door at night, but Makoto wakes up the next morning to find her dead body in his bathroom. As it turns out, Sayaka had planned to lure Leon into her room after switching rooms with Makoto so that she could murder him and pin the murder on Makoto, but Leon overpowered her. After Sayaka's trial, Kyoko tells Makoto that she likely fell victim to Leon due to a hesitation and not really wanting to betray Makoto. It's some interesting development, but only getting that development after she dies takes away a lot of the impact her death could have had. This is a running theme throughout this game that you'll see me bring up a lot. So let's talk about Leon. He's the ultimate baseball star and is a very stereotypical sports guy. The only interesting thing to note about him is that he wants to be a musician and quit baseball. He even could have had some interesting interactions with Sayaka based on that, but that never happens. Instead, he just murders her. He doesn't really have any development. The fact that Sayaka got a decent amount of character development for the short amount of time she was there just proves the potential they had to do something for the other characters, but Leon and Junko both get absolutely nothing. Even some of the characters that last all the way until the end of the game get little to no character development, but I'll get to them later. Next is Mondo, and he's actually pretty interesting. He's the ultimate biker gang leader, so of course he's a foul-mouthed brute. What makes him interesting are his insecurities and flaws. Mondo acts tough, but underneath he hides a terrible secret. He used to run his biker gang with his brother Dio, but after hearing murmurs among the other bikers that they all think less of Mondo compared to his older brother, he challenges Dio to a street race. In this race, Dio pushes Mondo out of the way of a truck, risking his life to save his brothers. Mondo, taking the blame for his brother's death, could never tell the truth behind why his brother died, and ran the gang alone. His inability to move on from the past and take responsibility leads him to become jealous when Chihiro approaches him for help getting stronger. Mondo knows that he is a secretly very weak person, and out of jealousy for Chihiro's strength, commits murder. It's honestly tragic, and that made his execution pretty heart-wrenching. You can't help but feel sorry for him and wish that he could have shared in Chihiro's strength to do better, rather than succumbing to his own weakness. Mondo's one of the better written characters in the game. He's pretty good. On that note, let's talk about Chihiro, one of the best characters in the game. She is the ultimate programmer, known for creating incredible programs with ease and efficiency. As you already know, Chihiro dies by Mondo's hand, but it's the event leading up to that which makes this arc so good. Chihiro is secretly male, and As an aside, I really don't know how to approach the politics of this character, so I'm just gonna do what the game does after this is revealed, and refer to Chihiro as a he. Hopefully no one gets mad at me for that. Is what I originally wrote over 3 years ago. Since then, I've learned a lot about gender and sexuality, as well as discovered new things about myself that make me feel much more at liberty to discuss the topics of Chihiro's gender and LGBT representation in Danganronpa more generally. I was going to add in a whole segment talking about it in detail, but without the context of story details that we haven't gotten to yet, it doesn't really make a ton of sense unless you've already played the game. I can't really fit this section in anywhere else in the video either, so instead I'll just say this. Personally, I don't think Chihiro was ever intended to be LGBT rep, and while parts of his character can certainly be seen as relatable to trans players, I don't think he even makes for very good representation anyway, for several reasons. I'm not gonna die on the hill that Chihiro isn't trans or argue against people who think he is. If that headcanon brings you some joy, by all means, you do you, but I'm also not very receptive to the arguments from people insisting that he is. As far as the literal interpretation of the text goes, Chihiro was assigned male at birth, and ultimately desires to be seen as male and to have masculine traits, but his skinny figure and somewhat feminine appearance held him back from that. He only ever leaned into that to avoid bullying. At the same time, he does sort of identify as a woman, but that's not because he wants to be one, it's because that's the easier role for him to fill, socially speaking. While Chihiro isn't explicitly transgender, one can look below the surface of the literal text and view parts of Chihiro's character as allegorical for a trans identity. It's not all that uncommon for characters to be allegories for LGBT identities, especially when the media companies in charge think that explicit representation is too much of a risk. Given the time period this game comes from, the late 2000s, that's definitely not impossible, and in some ways I see how this works for Chihiro. In fact, I see a lot of parallels to a trans-masculine experience in his character. But when you consider that his transition to female is just a result of bullying and not an actual desire to live or be seen as a woman, or that his transition to male gets him murdered when he comes out to Mondo, both interpretations just kind of fall flat, or at worst can be downright depressing. Again, I'm not trying to take away from any trans people's connections with Chihiro, and I do see the value in analyzing his character from a gender non-conforming point of view, but I can't really do that justice in the context of this review, and it wouldn't really change my opinion on him much for better or for worse. Either way, he's still one of my favorite characters in the game. I just want to clarify that in keeping in line with how Chihiro ultimately desires to be seen, I've chosen to use male pronouns when referring to him for the rest of this video. Not just because that's how he was born. Chihiro wants to be masculine. That's why he went to Mondo and confessed his secret to him in the first place, and I intend to respect that in this video. Once again, I don't want to take away from anyone else's understanding of the character, and I have no issues with people who view Chihiro as trans-feminine. This is just my understanding of the character. Okay, back to the original script. The reason Chihiro dresses as a girl is because he was bullied as a kid for being a weakling. Unable to handle the bullying, he dresses as a girl, so he won't be seen as a weak boy, but rather as a normal girl. When Monokuma threatens to reveal everyone's secrets in order to encourage a murder, Chihiro is afraid of everyone knowing his secret. While he is not ready to admit it outright, he uses it as a motivation to make himself stronger, so that he can freely express himself as a boy without the fear of being mocked as weak. He goes to Mondo in secret, telling him everything and asking him to help become stronger, since he looks up to Mondo as a strong person, being the leader of a biker gang and all. Unfortunately though, his trust is misplaced and it leads to his death. This is really great development and makes Chihiro one of the most memorable characters in the game, but once again, none of this information is revealed until after his death. Before that, he's a fairly interesting character from his limited exchanges with the group. Certainly not unlikable or annoying like some of the others are, but he doesn't get any significant development until it's too late. Having this knowledge before his death would have made the death a lot more impactful, pretty emotional even, but of course you can't have a murder mystery if you take out the mystery. Still though, I'm sure with enough effort they could have given Chihiro the development he needed for his death to be more impactful. Despite that, I am still happy with how he turned out as a character, and he's probably my favorite of the students. Next up is Hifumi, the ultimate fanfic creator. His entire gimmick is that he's a weird fat otaku. It's an incredibly overdone stereotype, and the jokes they make about him aren't very original. You've seen all these jokes before. That said, he doesn't seem to really care very much about the jokes being made at his expense, so it's nice to see a character like this not relegated to being a punching bag the entire time. Despite the unoriginality, I never really got annoyed with him at all. I wasn't really laughing out loud at him, but he got the occasional chuckle out of me. I can definitely see some people getting really tired of him really fast though, since he doesn't get much development and hammering on the same joke all the way up until he dies gets pretty old. At the very least, I can respect that they made him so confident, likely due to his work being so popular for what it is. He displays the more positive aspects of fandom culture, taking pride in the content that he creates. He's very passionate, and in a way, I can see a little bit of myself in him. I definitely know what it's like to go on long tangents about very specific things, and being seen as weird for it. It's refreshing to see a character in that position still be confident and strong, and I honestly have a bit of a soft spot for him. Then there's Taka, the ultimate moral compass. That basically just means he always follows the rules. He assumes the role of group leader very quickly, and he fits the position well. He's very confident in himself, and that allows him to easily direct the group and keep everyone on track. He is a pretty one-note character for a majority of his time in the game, and his loudness can get a little grating, but he goes through some interesting development after Case 2. See, before Case 2, he and Mondo bonded over a competition, which was initially spurred by an argument. Their contrasting character archetypes made this conflict very believable and pretty fun to watch, and their sudden friendship following suit is pretty interesting. After Mondo is revealed as Chihiro's murderer in the Case 2 trial, Taka is heartbroken, refusing to believe it, but after watching Mondo's execution, he goes completely silent for literal days. Every time it cut to his face with that blank expression, it kinda gave me chills. Then, after a pep talk from an AI version of Mondo, I'll explain that later, he regains his confidence and basically fuses his spirit with Mondo's. The combination of Taka and Mondo's very different character types into one results in a pretty entertaining character. Unfortunately, this doesn't last long as he dies shortly after. While it takes a while for his character to become interesting at all, he does eventually get there. I just wish he got there a little sooner. Now for Celeste. She is the ultimate gambler, having won millions in underground gambling rings or something like that. Honestly, they really don't do anything with her talent, so it's pretty much just an excuse for her to be there. She has this weird gothic getup and goes by the alias Celestia Ludenberg rather than her real Japanese name. She's very calculated and attentive, so the whole ultimate gambler thing at least fits her personality, but there's really not a whole lot to say about her. She's a very surface level character with not a lot of depth. In fact, she doesn't really do anything interesting until Case 3, where she creates a plot to use Hifumi to kill Taka, only to betray Hifumi and kill him afterwards, all while trying to pin the murder on Hiro, who we'll get to in a bit. When she's accused of the murders in the trial, her calm and collected demeanor falls off. She drops her fake accent and has rage-fueled outbursts. Considering the perfectly maintained false identity she had for the rest of the game beforehand, it's kind of scary seeing her go crazy like that. Once she's found guilty, she reveals that her fantasy was to live in a fancy European castle with a bunch of handsome men as her butlers. It's a very basic thing to be the motivation behind her entire character, but whatever. What I did like though was how she also revealed that the whole facade of staying calm and collected was actually really hard for her to keep up, secretly hating every second of her life in the killing game and just wanting desperately to escape. It puts an interesting perspective on her previous interactions. She's an okay character, but really needed some stronger motivations and more than 10 minutes of interesting development to become anything greater. Next up is Sakura, the ultimate martial artist, and another one of my favorites. She does kind of have the problem of not really emoting a whole lot, but I can look past that when she has an interesting backstory and good development throughout the game. She's very direct and honest, and that makes her a character you come to trust very quickly. When Monokuma reveals that one of the students is actually a spy, Sakura is the last one on your mind. This makes it all the more surprising when it's revealed that she is the spy, though not by choice. Her role, as instructed by Monokuma, was to keep things interesting by murdering a student. Monokuma has Sakura's family dojo held hostage, forcing her compliance. Despite being the ultimate martial artist, she is a very delicate and caring person when it comes to her friends and family. She becomes very attached to another student, Hina, and is very protective of her. Their relationship is pretty endearing, which makes Case 4 all the more tragic. After asking to meet with Hiro, Toko, and Byakuya in the rec room, she's found dead, locked in the room from the inside, by herself. As the class trial plays out, it becomes more and more obvious what actually happened, and hearing Hina explain the story behind it all is pretty heartbreaking. Sakura wanted to meet with the others who were weary of her after the reveal that she was the spy in order to communicate with them honestly. Since they all don't trust her, she gets attacked by Toko and Hiro, though that's not at all what kills her. In an attempt to help her friends and save her family dojo, she ends up murdering herself by downing a bottle of poison. Not going down without a fight, she decides to break one of the school's regulations, knowing that she's going to kill herself anyway, by breaking the lock of the door to the headmaster's room in order to help the others gain more knowledge and aid their escape from the school. I'm greatly oversimplifying here, but the way it all plays out in the class trial is very emotional. Her self-sacrifice is very respectable and makes for an emotional scene as her suicide note is read aloud at the end of the trial. On to the final set of students, and these are all the ones who live to the end of the game. I'll start with Hina, since her relationship with Sakura is the key aspect of her character. Hina is the ultimate swimming pro, so she's just the sporty type. The girl version of Leon, basically. She's got all the stereotypical sporty girl tropes. High energy, passion for doing the sports, kinda tough exterior but soft interior. You've seen all these characteristics before. She also has a love of donuts. It's a pretty random quirk for her to have, and there's not really a stated reason for this, at least as far as I'm aware, so it comes across as more of a running joke than anything else. But she also has a lot of trust for her close friends, as evidenced by her sticking by Sakura's side and trying to help her convince the others to trust her after Sakura is revealed to be a spy. And the way she gets so angry and emotional at everyone else for not believing her and presumably driving her to suicide, though it's revealed afterwards that wasn't the case, is a pretty strong moment for her. However, that's kinda the only strong moment for her. The other 99% of the time, she's just not interesting in the slightest. She has no personality at all for the majority of the game, and her very stereotypical personality comes off as kind of annoying at times. She's not a bad character, just one of the weaker ones. But then we have Hiro, the ultimate clairvoyant. Like I said before, he's the token stupid/stoner character. He's never useful in the class trials, only ever wasting time with pointless distracting nonsense rather than providing a useful perspective or information. The absolute worst example of this is at the very start of Case 5, where all of the students have been accounted for aside from Kyoko, with a masked body being found dead and then exploded, assumed to be Kyoko's. She then turns up just before the trial begins, and Hiro wastes the first 20 minutes of the trial insisting that she's a ghost until he's proven otherwise with evidence. That was really obnoxious, and he isn't much better throughout the rest of the game. Unlike most of the other characters who have at least one good moment, Hiro doesn't even have that. At best, he's useless, and at worst, he's annoying. Even his ultimate talent seems like bullshit. How exactly is he the ultimate clairvoyant when his self-pronounced claim to fame is being right at least 20% of the time? Even the worst characters in the game have their talents legitimized in some way, but Hiro doesn't even have that. I don't hate him, but he is definitely among the worst students of the cast. I wouldn't be as harsh on him, or Hina for that matter, if they had died early, but like I said, that they are among the characters who last until the end of the game. They had the entire game to flesh these characters out more, but just didn't. The fact that some of the characters who died in the first 2 chapters are more fleshed out than these two is a pretty big problem for me. Anyway, next is Byakuya, who seems to be a pretty divisive character from what I've seen. As the ultimate affluent progeny, which basically just means he was born into a super rich family, he's extremely self-confident to the point of being arrogant. Him being right a lot of the time would also make this really annoying if it weren't for his villainistic role. He is meant to be an obnoxious, arrogant asshole, so it can be satisfying to see him fail. He's the kind of guy you love to hate, and for a pseudo-villain, that's a good thing in my eyes. Case after case, he's always one step ahead of you, constantly gloating about his own brilliance. That is, until Case 4, where his hyper-logical brain causes him to overlook the possibility of Sakura committing suicide as a selfless act to help the others. Seeing him so flustered over how it just doesn't make sense to him is immensely satisfying. He even takes this humiliating failure as inspiration to be more kind and caring for the others in the group. He's still very arrogant and stuck in his ways for the rest of the game, but seeing him grow as a person through his failures is pretty endearing. Byakuya goes through a genuine character arc, and I really like that about him. His pompousness can be annoying at times, but I always found that as a fun way to fuel your hatred for the character you're meant to hate for most of the game, so I personally don't really consider that a negative. He's a pretty great character in my opinion. On the flip side, there's Toko, the ultimate writing prodigy, having sold millions of copies for her romance novels. While this never really comes up in the main story, she at least has something to legitimize her talent, unlike Hiro. Toko is my least favorite character in the entire game. I know some people like her, and I hear that she's better in her other appearances throughout the series, but as far as her portrayal in this game goes, she is downright awful. She has this gimmick where she constantly stutters like someone with severe anxiety, and at first I thought, okay, this could make for an interesting character later on if there's some kind of interesting backstory or something. But then she immediately gets hyper defensive and makes a scene. For the first half of the game, every scene with her just devolves down to that. Anytime anyone says anything to her, she freaks out for no reason and retaliates by being an asshole. This isn't cute or endearing, it's fucking annoying. Later, she reveals her second form, Genocide Jill. See, Toko has a split personality, where one is an anxious writer who would faint at the mere sight of blood, and the other is a serial killer. No joke, no gimmick, just a straight-up serial killer. Despite this, she never actually kills anyone, though I kinda wish she did so I wouldn't have had to deal with her as much. Genocide Jill is just as annoying as regular Toko, if not more so. She's extremely upbeat and cheery, which contrasts with her talking about murdering cute boys all the time. The constant maniacal laughing is also very grating. As if the obnoxious attitudes weren't bad enough, she also becomes obsessed with Byakuya, so whenever she's not being annoying, she's creepily drooling over or even stalking someone who clearly does not have feelings for her. In fact, he makes it quite obvious that he does not enjoy her presence whatsoever. Every single one of her personality traits comes off as irritating, and she has no good moments to redeem herself. Finally, there is Kyoko, and she's another one of the best characters in the game. At first, she's very quiet to the point of being kinda weird, but as soon as the first trial begins, she really starts to shine. She's very methodical when it comes to the investigations, and always has something interesting to point out. Whereas Hiro only ever holds progress of the trials back with his useless nonsense, Kyoko is always helping to push the trials forward, offering new perspectives and evidence to help keep things moving. I don't mean to beat a dead horse in regards to Hiro, I just really don't like him. Anyway, back to Kyoko. The reason she doesn't tell you what her ultimate talent is at first is because she actually doesn't remember. She doesn't really remember much of anything. She doesn't explain this either, at least not until much later, but that makes sense as it's not really of anyone else's concern. As she became more outspoken from the Case 1 trial onwards, I could feel her character starting to grow on me, and she only became more and more interesting as the mystery surrounding who she is as well as the mystery of the school itself unfolded. She does have the problem of not really emoting very much, so she doesn't get much in the way of emotional moments, but it's well made up for by her interesting backstory and the slow drip feed of reveals about her throughout the game. You later learn that she is the ultimate detective, though I did kinda see that one coming, as her abilities when it comes to solving cases were too natural to be a coincidence. What's even more interesting is the reveal that she's the daughter of the headmaster of Hope's Peak Academy. Not Monokuma, but the actual headmaster. And listening to her tell Makoto her backstory is really interesting. I do kinda wish they explained how she came to remember everything, but I can kinda let that one slide for the sake of having a really interesting character. I know I said finally before introducing Kyoko, but we're actually not quite done yet. Makoto himself is still a character after all, and despite being the character player, he does still have his own dialogue and role in the story and whatnot, so he gets judged based on that too. He's not that great. In fact, I'd go as far as to say he's pretty lackluster. Being the ultimate lucky student, he doesn't actually really have any talent. He doesn't have any specific interests or quirks either. He's basically a non-character, and he even admits it himself, stating multiple times just how normal and uninteresting he is. Admitting it is not an excuse for lazy writing. Having a player character be a blank slate for the player to project onto is one thing, but I don't think that's really what they were going for here. With plentiful dialogue and his own voice actor, he's clearly meant to be a character just like anyone else in the game. He's just a very boring one. I suppose it's better than trying to do something more with him and ending up with an unlikable protagonist, but considering that they were clearly capable of writing good characters with the likes of Kyoko and Chihiro, they could have at least tried. He has a handful of decent moments when he reacts to certain things, and seeing him thinking to himself about certain characters or situations can be kinda interesting sometimes, but it's just not enough to make up for an otherwise uninteresting character. Finally, for real this time, we have Monokuma himself, and I've saved the best for last here. Monokuma is the villain of the game, being the creator of the killing game and forcing the students into it. He's basically an all-powerful god, having limitless weapons to keep the students from rebelling and security cameras in almost every room to monitor everything. This also means he knows the ins and outs of every murder, but of course, being the organizer of all this, does nothing about them, only using his knowledge to determine whether or not the verdict in the class trial is correct. As a villain, he is absolutely fantastic. His voice acting is great like I mentioned before, and he has a wonderful presence. He always steals the show, and his wacky antics are endlessly entertaining, especially in the faces of these utterly hopeless students. You can tell that Monokuma is really having a lot of fun, and watching everyone react with such despair, only giving Monokuma exactly what he wants, is pretty funny. He has such a stranglehold over everything, making him very effective as a villain, and all the more satisfying to take down in the end. Finding little workarounds and loopholes throughout the game to try and cheat Monokuma feels great, but then he turns around and reveals he knew it all the whole time, and only further drives that despair into the students. The way he pretends to act all sad when the rightfully upset students talk back to him, only for him to immediately stop caring and go back to being the sadistic villain that he is, was always really funny to me. He's an incredibly enjoyable villain, and my pick for the best character in the entire game. But that's not really all of them. Of course, Monokuma isn't a real live bear or something, he's an advanced robot, meaning someone is controlling him from behind the scenes, and that person is Junko. But wait, didn't she die? Well, yes and no. She certainly did die, but that was not Junko. It was her twin sister, Mukuro, who has switched places with her and set everything up from behind the scenes with her. Together, they are the ultimate despair. That also means that Junko killed her own sister, and of course, that doesn't bother her one bit. I'll talk about Mukuro's characters first, because there is a lot less to say. That's because she isn't a character. She's a plot device. The only interesting thing she has going for her is some mystery of who is the secret 16th student and her backstory of being a young military-obsessed little soldier who ran off with a terrorist group or something. Of course, that doesn't really do anything for her character, it's all just provided as exposition long after she'd already died, so yeah, I don't really even count her as a character, as the only time you ever get to talk to her is when she's pretending to be someone else. I can at least credit her as being an interesting plot device, but still, that's all she is. Junko, on the other hand, is the other worst character in the game. What a contrast, too, between the lovably sadistic and entertaining as hell Monokuma and the annoying, gimmicky puppeteer who never shuts the hell up. Seriously, once she's revealed as the true mastermind, she comes in with this obnoxious fake British accent, only to change her entire personality 5 seconds later. She does this switching between personalities thing for the entire rest of the game, and all she does is sit there and spout exposition for way too long, and she does it in the most annoying way possible. Not only is it irritating as hell, but it also ruins the end of the game, since you're forced to sit through her endless exposition dump. At least her execution is kinda satisfying, but that's more so because of how annoying she was than her being a good villain at all. What a shame to end on such a sour note. So that is finally all of the characters, and man, that was exhausting, but I have to be thorough here or I'm not doing my due diligence as a reviewer. Since that was a lot we just went over, I'll sum it all up with a quick graphic. This is my simplified tier list of all the characters. S tier has the best characters of the game, A tier has the great characters, B tier has the good characters, C tiers are okay, and the ones in D tier are outright bad. You see the problem here? This is not a very good spread. They were just too ambitious, having this giant cast of over 15 characters, so of course many are going to be left underdeveloped or just plain poorly executed. That said, I can applaud the game for having at least some good characters and a few that I actually really liked. It's just unfortunate that most of the characters I did like either died too early to get significant development or didn't get that development until after they died, but that's just how it goes. Of course, I could be missing some things here. Maybe I didn't talk to certain characters enough to get their full development, but the fact that important characters' development can be missed in optional scenes is evidence of a flawed system to me. There were only so many bits of free time for me to talk to the characters, and some of them ended up dying before I could even talk to them once, so there wasn't much I could do about that. My only options were to grind free times out or play this shitty looking minigame, and frankly, I'm not interested in either of those. If the game isn't going to bother making most of these characters interesting in the first place, I'm not going to go out of my way like that just to make sure I've seen all the dialogue or whatever. That just isn't worth my time. The fact is, half the cast ended up being bad to just okay, and that's not a very good ratio. I am glad that I at least walked away with positive memories of some good characters, but judging the cast as a whole, I'd give it like a C+ to a B-. Not bad, but definitely could have been better. That brings us to the plot itself, as well as the murder cases. See, the plot is divided into two separate parts, the cases and the overarching plot, the mystery of the school. The latter is much more interesting, and when they come together is when the game is at its best. So, I'll go in order and give my thoughts on each major story beat and murder case. So, picking up where we left off from introduction earlier, everyone settles into their new lives at Hope's Peak. The whole crew is pretty filled with dread, and the thought of a student committing murder to try and escape is looming over everyone's heads. The group decides to try and stay strong, though, and search for an alternate method of escape. Seeing their unwillingness to budge and do what he wants, Monokuma decides to give everyone a little nudge by passing out a box of DVDs, each labeled with a student's name. When everyone watches their DVDs, things quickly turn for the worst. You get to see Makoto's firsthand, and later Sayaka's as well. Presumably they all have similar contents of each student's loved ones being gone. Friends, family, whatever it is, every one of the students is essentially traumatized with these DVDs, and it's the thought of losing those in the outside world that eventually causes the murders to occur. Monokuma does this a few times throughout the story, give the characters all some kind of motivation to get killing. It's a good way to keep the story moving and give a unique motive for every case. I think this is a pretty smart setup and definitely helped to inject a good amount of variety into the story. So that leaves us with Case 1, the murder of Sayaka. As I explained before, she lied to Makoto in order to get him to switch rooms with her for the night, so that she could lure Leon into his room, murder him, and then pin the murder on Makoto, all in order to graduate. She tells Makoto a ton about how she cares so much for her friends in her idol group, and how she wants nothing more than to perform with them for the rest of her life, so her motivation is foreshadowed pretty well. Unfortunately for Sayaka, her plan backfires, and Leon manages to use the prop sword in Makoto's room to defend himself against Sayaka's attack. See, Sayaka had told Makoto earlier that he should try bringing it to his room for self-defense, just in case someone tries to attack him. Presumably this was all part of her plan, but if so, why didn't she just use that as the weapon to attack Leon with? Instead, she went all the way to the kitchen to get a knife, and then brought it back to use that as her murder weapon of choice. Even if having Makoto take the sword wasn't part of her plan and was instead just a suggestion, you'd think she would have that in mind when she did come up with a plan to use Makoto's room and frame him, considering she is the one that suggested Makoto to take the sword in the first place. It's a small thing, but still a pretty weird oversight for this case. This isn't the last of weird plot holes in this game, and while they might seem like nitpicks, some are more egregious than others and can really ruin some of the cases if you think back on it. This is one of the more minor examples, but of course it's my job as the reviewer to point this stuff out. Speaking of plot holes, another weird one is that Toko claims she'll faint at the mere sight of blood, and she does multiple times throughout the game, but not every time. After Sayaka's body is discovered, the students are called down to the gym so Monokuma can hand out the Monokuma file, explaining some basic facts about the case and send the students off to begin the investigation. This is where fake Junko rebels and is killed by Monokuma's spears, right in front of everyone, including Toko, who does not faint. Why give her this oddly specific character quirk if you're not going to follow through with it 100%? It's never explained why she doesn't faint at Junko's death, but then does every other time she sees a dead body, so my only guess is that it was an oversight in the writing. Anyway, back to the murder case. We obviously don't learn all the details until they're solved during the trial, but even without these details, the killer is painfully obvious from the get-go. Makoto finds Sayaka's dead body in the bathroom, and upon inspection has written Leon with her own blood as her dying message, but it's upside down. Of course, being the stupid dumb idiot he is, Makoto sees this and goes, "Duh, 11037, what that mean?" And I could not stop rolling my eyes every single time the very obvious solution was being overlooked. This game has something I like to call first case syndrome, which, for all the comparisons I've made, it does share with Ace Attorney. This is an issue in which the first case of the game is made way too easy to be interesting or engaging at all, just for the sake of being the game's tutorial. Like I said, the Ace Attorney games do this too, even in the sequels, but at least in those games the mechanics are straightforward and can be explained away in the first case so the game can move on, and the first case is usually pretty short, only taking around 45 minutes or so. In this game, however, not only are there tutorials all the way up through chapter 4 because of how many extra mechanics there are, but the first case didn't end until 6 hours into my playthrough. I know I can be a bit of a slow reader, but even I know what makes for good pacing based on my own reading speed thanks to other better paced visual novels that I've played. Like I said, the first case in any Ace Attorney game is usually over by the first hour, maybe hour and a half. But due to the nature of having so many characters and needing to give them all screen time and set up the plot and blah blah blah, it takes a lot longer to get through the first case in this game, and the early game pacing feels really slow because of that. Overall, Case 1 is just not good. It's got bad pacing, minor plot holes, and an insultingly easy solution to the point where watching the characters struggle to figure out was genuinely frustrating. At the very least, I can give it credit for having the twist that Sayaka was initially behind it and only died because her plan to murder Leon backfired, and that did help make things more interesting, but it's not enough to make up for the myriad of problems this case has otherwise. Fortunately, this is the worst case in the game, and they mostly get progressively better from here on out. Once Sayaka's trial is over, things settle down for a few more days, and the group sets up some more rules to keep things in order and prevent any more murders from occurring. But of course, Monokuma has other plans, and once again provides them with a new motive to inspire some more killing. This time, he hands everyone a card with their name on it, revealing a deep, dark secret of theirs. He threatens to tell the whole world if someone doesn't die in the next 24 hours. Of course, Makoto's secret is he wet the bed as a kid because Makoto is the most boring character ever conceived and they really just couldn't think of anything interesting for him. But some of the other secrets are much more embarrassing. As I mentioned earlier, Mondo's secret is that he killed his brother, though it isn't exactly accurate. It's more like his brother lost his life to save Mondo's in the street race, which was Mondo's idea, but it's not exactly wrong either, but whatever, semantics. The fear of his secret getting out and his whole gang of bikers finding out, along with the jealousy of Chihiro's strength, is what drives him to murder Chihiro. However, Byakuya happened to see Mondo fleeing the boys' locker room in the middle of the night, so of course he goes in and discovers Chihiro's dead body. Instead of checking for evidence to make the case easier to solve, he decides to set up a fake crime scene in the girls' locker room, using Sayaka's old e-handbook to get in and making it look like the infamous serial killer Genocide Jack, or as we later discover him to be Genocide Jill, Toko's other personality, was the real culprit. So why would he frame someone else for the murder and potentially risk his own life along with everyone else's? Well, considering he knew Mondo was behind the murder the whole time and could simply explain as such if things got too dicey during the trial, he switched things around to implicate Toko just for the sake of making things more interesting. Maybe he also did it to reveal Toko's identity to the rest of the group, but at that point she wasn't annoyingly obsessing over him yet, so there's not really much incentive for him to do that, and if there was a reason, he never says as much, so that's really just a guess. I only feel the need to come up with a better reason because Byakuya wanting to make things more interesting is a terrible one. This is just a lazy way of injecting mystery into a case that didn't have any, rather than just writing one that has mystery naturally. Case 3 does that just fine, so why did they have to have such an ass-pull excuse to give Case 2 some of that much-needed spicing up? Of course, because of this distraction, half the case is spent assuming Toko is the culprit, and then Byakuya for fiddling with the crime scene, but then one detail out of nowhere implicates Mondo. At least it's not super obvious like the first case, and as we'll see later, the third case as well, but it feels like a bit of an ass pull because there's nothing connecting any of the evidence to Mondo initially, so it just kind of happens in the middle of the trial, and you're like, oh, I guess it was Mondo then, okay. It feels to me like that was the most natural way they thought of to implement Toko's split personality, yet it feels so completely unnatural that they might as well have not even bothered with it. Considering how much more annoying it makes her character, I actually would have preferred it that way. Anyway, I already explained the ending of the case before, with Mondo getting jealous of Chihiro and killing her, followed by Mondo dumping exposition about his past before being executed, but that whole thing just leaves you feeling kind of empty. Mondo's character is so tragic, and the victory feels hollow. Putting that sense of dread in the player as they're supposed to be winning is pretty great, and really sets the tone for the days following. At this point, however, the group has discovered a laptop hidden in one of the lockers in the bathhouse. Before, when it was found in the library, they couldn't get it working, but Chihiro got his hands on it at some point and was able to fix it and upload an AI he programmed called Alter Ego onto the laptop. When they stumble upon the laptop hidden in the bathhouse, Kyoko tasks Alter Ego with rooting through the computer's files to see if they can find any useful information about the school they're now trapped in. Alter Ego is kept in the locker for safekeeping, as the bathhouse is the only room in the school with no security camera in it, and they can safely leave Alter Ego there to do its business without Monokuma finding it. However, Hifumi and Taka both become a bit obsessed with the laptop. Hifumi has frequent conversations with Alter Ego at night and kind of falls in love with it. It's weird, but I get it. He says that he never really has the opportunity to just talk about his interests without being ignored or seen as weird. And despite knowing that Alter Ego is just an AI that craves information to learn more about the world and everything in it, he still feels a personal connection with it that he's never gotten with a real person before. Taka, on the other hand, still distraught over Mondo's death, asks Makoto to take him to see Alter Ego, and ask it about Chihiro and Mondo. Alter Ego takes Mondo's form and gives Taka a little pep talk, giving him the determination and strength to continue on, better than ever before. He basically goes Super Saiyan, and it's kind of funny seeing the mix of Taka's good nature and Mondo's recklessness when he says stuff like F you or whatever. It's silly, but I like it. Unfortunately though, like I said earlier, it's not long before Taka is found dead. See, Monokuma has given yet another bit of motivation to move the killing game along, as everyone's been distracted with Alter Ego trying to find a way out of the school. This time he promises $10 million to whoever graduates alongside their freedom from the school. Then he just leaves the money sitting there on the podium. It doesn't really move either. Anyone could have taken it and stashed it in their room, but no one ever does. Anyway, with the new motivation and the conflict between Hifumi and Taka over the laptop, the setup is perfect for another murder to take place. Celeste lies to Hifumi, saying that she saw Taka take the laptop and even that he abused and blackmailed her after she caught him. Despite that being very out of character for Taka, Hifumi falls for her trick and she convinces him to help her by murdering Taka, promising that she would then murder someone else so that they would both get away with it and graduate together. Their plan was to build a suit specifically for Hiro, fake some evidence that would implicate the person in the suit, and then stuff Hiro into the suit. The plan begins with Celeste pretending to be attacked in the rec room by a person in the big robot suit with a small hammer. Then Hifumi is found in the library having been attacked with a slightly bigger hammer. They get him to the nurse's office, then split up to investigate the attacker with Celeste. What follows is a Scooby-Doo-like chase around the school, following scream after scream from one floor to another, finding Hifumi dead, then Taka dead, then both bodies are moved to another room where Hifumi is actually barely still alive, saying that he was attacked by Yasuhiro, which is Hiro's full first name, before dying for real this time. This chain of events is complete and utter chaos, with a ton of back and forth and new things happening every 5 seconds. Plus, with a giant robot on the loose, nothing seems to make any sense. This makes it very satisfying to untangle the web and figure out what really happened. The creative premise makes it a really entertaining case too. Unfortunately, this satisfaction is somewhat overshadowed by the fact that, like the first case, the culprit is extremely and immediately obvious. I mean, not 15 minutes into the setup for this case, Hifumi spouts a line naming the robot as Robo-Justice, and says, "At least that's what I decided to call him just now," after being found in the library having allegedly been attacked by the robot. Instantly I caught on to him being involved, and Celeste's suspicious behavior was enough to implicate her very quickly. I knew Celeste was behind it all before the investigation even began, so the trial basically boiled down to putting the pieces in place of exactly what happened and when, and like I said, untangling that web is satisfying, but not as much as it could have been due to the murderer being so obvious. On top of that, the whole thing with Hifumi using his dying words to say the person who attacked him was Yasuhiro is just stupid. See, the twist is that Celeste's real name is not Celeste. Well, that's not the twist, that was obvious, but the twist was that her real name was Taiko Yasuhiro. When you consider that Hifumi always refers to people by their last names, this makes sense. But the problem is that no one knew this until the very end of her trial, and considering how she treated Hifumi beforehand, I would have a hard time believing she would have just told him as much. She had absolutely no reason to. Granted, she intended on murdering him anyway, so telling him her real name wouldn't have made much of a difference, but it's never explained that he asked her, or she told him, knowing that the connection between her name and Hiro's would be enough to confuse people if he spoke up or anything. Even if they did give a valid reason for her revealing her name to Hifumi, which they don't, it is a complete ass pull to have her last name be identical to Hiro's first name. I would have believed this more if we knew her full name from the very beginning, but it's kept a secret until after she's revealed to be the murderer. Honestly, this entire conflict could have just been written out of the story entirely and only serves to muddy down the case. On the more positive side, I can definitely vouch for the creativity of this case. Between the robot suit with the cartoony design, the justice hammers, and the variety of locations in which events occur throughout the day of the murders, there's a lot to enjoy here. Definitely a step up from the very simplistic setups of the previous two cases. Overall, I'm kinda mixed on this case. It has its positives, but the overtly obvious solution and a few hiccups in the writing really drag it down for me. It might sound like I'm over-exaggerating at flaws, but this is a murder mystery game. There's not much fun in solving a mystery you already know the answer to, and plot holes or questionable decision-makings in the writing can really harm a game like this, much more than it would for the storytelling in most other genres. Following Celeste's execution, things are looking grim, and the gang laments the loss of over half of their friends. This is where things get really tense, and the dreadful atmosphere is very strong. Not helping the sorrow the students are all going through are Byakuya and Toko, who all but disappear during the free time the students have for a few days. On top of this, Kyoko gets mad at Makoto when he won't tell her about something he saw. That something is a pretty big something, and he spends the next few days trying to talk to Sakura about it before confronting the others. One night, he was wandering around in the middle of the night for some reason that I can't remember, and follows some noises across to the gym. There, he finds Sakura fighting Monokuma, telling him that she won't help him anymore and is going to betray him, to which Monokuma replies by threatening her with something that he has held hostage to keep her in check. Now, beforehand, Monokuma had revealed that one of the students was a spy, but doesn't say who yet. After this encounter, Makoto assumes Sakura to be the spy, but is too afraid to tell Kyoko without talking to Sakura first, which creates the conflict between them, and they have some tension for a few days. This conflict is really well executed, as Kyoko had shown a lot of trust in Makoto, which says a lot about their relationship considering how closed off Kyoko was most of the time. Seeing her open up and allow herself to be vulnerable in front of Makoto, only to feel betrayed when he refuses to reveal what he saw to her, you can really relate to the feelings of both characters, making it all the more upsetting to see Kyoko so hurt by this, becoming even more closed off than normal as a result. There is one problem with this conflict though. For some reason, the game gives you the option to choose whether or not to tell Kyoko about what you saw, only to tell you, no, pick the other option if you tried to tell her. Seriously, why even fucking bother giving the player an option if you're just gonna force them into the choice you want them to take anyway? If they really wanted to give you an option here, they should have let you pick what you want and have different outcomes based on your choice. For example, telling Kyoko could lead to the two of you confronting Sakura together, giving her the courage to tell everyone and explain the situation herself before Monokuma tells everyone, so that the others will still trust her even after the reveal. Then Case 4 could have a different scenario entirely, with Hiro being murdered by Toko or something, with Sakura surviving to the end instead. Both of those characters suck, so getting rid of them would be fine by me. I know I'm kind of ranting about something as innocuous as a dialogue option being pointless, but it only leaves me feeling unsatisfied with what could have been, rather than just allowing Makoto to make his own decisions as a character, rather than forcing this vessel for the player crap that they won't even commit to. It's a minor nitpick, yes, but it's still an issue that really bothered me personally. Anyway, Monokuma gathers the crew together after a few days with no murders to give the next bit of motivation. This time, however, instead of offering something or threatening something or whatever, he uses the opportunity to reveal outright that Sakura was his spy all along. His intention is to disrupt what little peace the group had and cause even more tension. Of course, this starts working pretty much immediately, sending the group into a big back and forth that offers Sakura little time to explain herself. It's not long before she's found dead in the rec room, locked in from the inside. From the moment that her body is discovered, something seems off. Like, you can tell that this isn't a normal murder. There's something much darker behind this case. The way Sakura's body is slumped over in the chair, being locked in from the inside, you get the suspicion that she might have done it herself, but unlike the first and third cases, it's not obvious. Just a hunch that becomes slowly, depressingly affirmed as the trial goes on. The investigation is mostly pretty straightforward, and you're left to fill in the blanks throughout the trial to discover the true nature of Sakura's death. I mentioned before Sakura had a very strong relationship with Hina, and even when she was outed as a spy, Hina continued to trust her. I mean, they did basically everything together. They went swimming and worked out together, they had little regimens that they did every day. They were very close, and Hina's reaction to finding Sakura's body is pretty heartbreaking. The truth is, she sort of knew about it all beforehand. See, when Sakura planned to meet with the students who still didn't trust her, she set up a plan with Hina. Of course, her plan didn't work out, so she left Hina a suicide note before downing some poison. I guess to add a little drama to the case, Monokuma swaps out her suicide note with a fake one that complains about the brutality the other students showed her. Hina takes this to heart and tries to pin herself for the murder, so everyone will be executed and suffer for their mistreatment of Sakura. It's a pretty extreme reaction, even putting herself on the chopping block for it, but it's understandable considering just how close she was with Sakura. Then, of course, after the trial, Monokuma reads off her real suicide note, which is much more noble and selfless, giving everyone the hope to continue and work together to get out of the school once and for all. Even inspiring Byakuya and Toko to help, who had previously just kind of been doing their own things. This is easily the best case of the game, being very character-driven. That is the recipe for the best cases in this game, such as Case 2's ending and Hifumi's role in Case 3. Case 4 executes these ideas perfectly though, having enough context before the case for it to be emotionally effective throughout, and not just at the end when everything gets revealed, as well as not making the solution too obvious. It's got good pacing, good atmosphere, good writing, and a fantastic ending. By far the best case in the game. I think this is the absolute peak of Danganronpa's potential, which I honestly think the game overall fails to capitalize on. If more cases were of this quality, even with all my issues with the gameplay, I could call the game pretty good. But this is the only time it really reaches its full potential, unfortunately. I can still say that thanks to the emotional investment in Sakura and Hina's characters and the payoff at the end of the trial, this case does a fantastic job of capitalizing on the game's potential and leaves a lasting impression. This is what Danganronpa could have over Ace Attorney. Where Ace Attorney takes an entire game to set up a case like this, Danganronpa could have almost all of the cases be this good. Unfortunately, in this game, most cases just aren't contextualized well enough to do it, so it falls short. One last thing to mention is that since Sakura's murderer was herself and Monokuma still has to execute someone, this case's execution goes to Alter Ego. See, after Kyoko and Makoto worked together to sneak the laptop into a hidden room and hook it up to the internet earlier, Monokuma was able to find it pretty quickly, saving it for this special occasion. This brings us to Case 5. Kyoko and Makoto had made up during Case 4, and with hope instilled in the remaining students, everyone is working together to find a way out. That is, until Makoto goes to bed early one night with a fever and is attacked in the middle of the night. Meanwhile, Kyoko goes missing and won't reappear until the start of the class trial. On top of that, the next morning they discover a body in a mask and a coat, dead in the newly opened garden room. In an attempt to discover who the body belongs to, Toko jumps in trying to rip off the mask, and a bomb goes off, destroying the body beyond recognition. Considering the students present, however, it is assumed to be Kyoko at first, and even Makoto is unsure despite seeing her at some point in his room after being attacked the night before. Really, the mystery behind this case boils down to Kyoko's whereabouts and the true identity of the body, as well as who killed them. But there are little discrepancies as well that add to it, such as one of the garden room's chickens having disappeared, and the body not being wet despite the sprinklers in that room going off at 7:30 every morning. This is where Makoto learns about the 16th student, Mukuro, and after Kyoko shows up for the class trial, he assumes the body to be that of Mukuro. However, the trial just kinda runs everyone in circles, and once they've squeezed out every last bit of information they can, Makoto is backed into a corner with only two options: implicate Kyoko or implicate himself. You actually get a sort of alternate ending if you choose to present the evidence that would implicate Kyoko, where she gets executed and the rest of the cast live a happy, normal life within the school, never experiencing another murder again. The funny part is that this is arguably just as good of an ending as the real one in terms of the outcome, but Makoto interrupts saying, "No, that can't happen, we have to get out of here," and brings you back to the choice selection. There's also an option to run away, but I didn't click it. I do wonder if the result would have gone on as long as the option to implicate Kyoko, or if it would have just given me a simple dialogue box telling me to pick something else. With this game, I could really see it going either way. Anyway, picking the option to implicate yourself leads to Makoto being executed, and in the same exact way that Kyoko was. Kinda weird that they don't have more personalized executions considering all the other characters did, but whatever. Fortunately for Makoto, Alter Ego comes in to save the day at the last second, and instead of being pounded to death, he gets dumped deep into the trash hole. See, Alter Ego had somehow uploaded itself into Monokuma's system, which is actually foreshadowed a bit with Monokuma acting up and just not working at times. They even find his robotic body unmoving in the gym the night before the murder. While this is a cool concept and definitely not an ass pull, I do have to question the legitimacy of something like this. Alter Ego is an AI program, not a virus. It can't upload itself through a network and interfere like this. That's just downright unrealistic. Normally I'd be able to somewhat suspend my disbelief, but Alter Ego showed a mostly realistic interpretation of an AI program before this. Sure, it was a bit simplified and there's some more sci-fi-ish aspects like its visualization in the form of Chihiro's face, but it still acted like an AI program. It's believable enough that Chihiro would have given it the ability to scan the computer, but spreading through the network like a virus is just a bit too much of a stretch for me to find believable at all. But if Alter Ego could save Makoto from being executed, why didn't it step in to do the same for Kyoko when she was being executed in the alternate scenario where you implicate her? The only thing I can think of to excuse this is that the entire scene is just a hypothetical in Makoto's head, which is supported by him snapping out of it and going back to the choice selection screen, but that's not really a hard confirmation, and if that is the case, that also means he perfectly accurately predicted what the execution was going to be, which doesn't really make any sense. Either way, this whole situation with Alter Ego saving the day is a bit too unrealistic for me, and it's a small blemish on an otherwise really good case. So let's talk about the positives. This case is really engaging, and while it doesn't quite have the emotional connection that Case 4 has, it more than makes up for it with a really damn good mystery. I do wish Kyoko wasn't shown to you before the body was discovered, giving the player at least some of the same concern over whether or not Kyoko really was the one under the mask that the other characters have, but it still presents a really strong mystery, starting to tie in the underlying nature of the school into the murder itself, bringing up the hidden 16th student and raising more questions about how everyone got into this mess in the first place. Being that the overall plot regarding the school and the mysteries behind it is the best aspect of the game in my opinion, Case 5 implementing that makes it one of the best. So, not long after falling into the trash pit, Makoto is visited by Kyoko, who throws herself into the trash chute to rescue him. Earlier, she had found a key in the headmaster's room that allowed her access to any room. This is the piece of evidence that would implicate her in Case 5, by the way. Makoto was the only person she told about it. She uses the key to unlock the big door leading back into the building, where they must climb the ladder from Snake Eater to re-enter through the latch in the furnace room, which Kyoko had unlocked before going down to save Makoto. Why she didn't just climb down the ladder instead of throwing herself down the trash chute, I'm not entirely sure, but whatever. Actually, no, now that I think about it, how did she even know that Makoto ended up below the trash chute to begin with? Sure, she's the ultimate detective, but unless she went down there herself while she was snooping around, I don't know how she could have come to that conclusion. If she did go down there herself, why didn't she leave that big door unlocked just in case? I mean, maybe she did and Monokuma went and locked it again, but this is all just speculation and guesswork. Whatever, small nitpick aside, they make their way back inside the main part of the school to reconvene with the other students. At this point, they basically just challenge Monokuma to a final showdown to expose the true killer of the victim from Case 5 and discover the secrets behind the school to achieve their victory and leave from the school, living freely in the outside world once again. One last trip through the school to gather evidence later, and the students find themselves in the final trial. Like the previous case, it does a great job of weaving the mystery of Hope's Peak and the murder into the one case. But since the last case focused on the same murder, it's kinda just more of the same. The reveals about the school get more interesting, but by this point you've pretty much already figured out the murder, and going through the trial for it is just a formality. On top of that, there's a few different pieces of evidence that never get used in the trial, like the headmaster's remains or the picture of Kyoko and the headmaster, so why even bother having them be a part of your evidence list? However, that's not all the final trial has to offer, as they still have to figure out the secret behind the school and their lives at Hope's Peak in order to leave. After being found out as the murderer and mastermind behind everything, Junko appears alongside the other students in the flesh to dump exposition for an hour. Unfortunately, this is where the story goes south, as the exposition dump goes on for far too long, and it just seems to spread the ending out as wide as it possibly can, with Junko constantly going on about her despair nonsense. Honestly, her entire motivation for this whole thing is just stupid. She goes on and on about how she and her sister were the ultimate despair, and they secretly lived among the students, waiting for their chance to take over and start the killing game, but being really into the emotion of despair is not a good motivation. There's no reason given as to why Junko and Mukuro are the ultimate despair, they just are. Listening to Junko blab about it while not even giving any concrete reason as to why she does any of this is just dumb and made her entire exposition dump boring and uninteresting. It's not just the questions about her motivation that go unanswered either. The whole ending leaves a ton of holes and unanswered questions, and it makes the conclusion really unsatisfying. First, let me go over what the game does explain. Every one of the students did actually go to Hope's Peak Academy, and for the year that they did attend together, they all lived together happily. Throughout the game, you find pictures of the students hanging out together, and this culminates in the final investigation, where everyone finds pictures of the entire class of students except for themselves. This was just a trick by Monokuma to make each of them think that everyone else was in on it so that they'd all fight each other, but Makoto figures this out and puts an end to the bickering. Regardless, those pictures were all real, but it all happened 2 years ago. The very beginning of the game, where Makoto enters the building for the first time, that was actually when his life at Hope's Peak began. After the first year, however, something called the tragedy occurred at Hope's Peak. Described as the worst, most awful event in human history, it presumably led to the destruction of the entire world. After the tragedy happened, the headmaster of Hope's Peak tried to turn the school into a fortress, keeping the students there safe until the time was right for them to return to the outside world as the remaining beacons of hope that would shape the world back into what it once was. You see the headmaster interviewing each of the students on a tape during the investigation, and every student willingly agrees to live at Hope's Peak, with Makoto even saying, "It's not like we have any other choice," in his interview. Little did the headmaster know, the ultimate despair, Junko and Mukuro, were both among the student body and planned to sabotage the perfect life in Hope's Peak and crush the students' hope with their killing game. The students all live at Hope's Peak for about a year when Junko and Mukuro set their plan into action, killing the headmaster and taking over the school with Monokuma. They take away the memories of the rest of the students from the past 2 years, and the killing game begins. So, where do I even begin? What was the tragedy? I presume whatever it was had something to do with Hope's Peak directly, as one of the 5th floor classrooms and the entire 2nd floor of dorms are ravaged, destroyed to pieces, and covered in blood. But other than that, it's never explained or even hinted at. Next, how did they build Monokuma? Junko and Mukuro are the ultimate fashionista and soldier, not the ultimate engineers. There's no way they could build something as complicated as Monokuma on their own. I mean, they literally describe his inner workings as more complicated than the tech they use at NASA. The post-credits scene shows Monokuma is still alive after Junko's execution, so maybe he was created by someone else? Either that or Junko is still alive, but neither really have anything to suggest one choice over the other. How did they manage to wipe the students' memories? Nothing in the game alludes to the ability to give someone amnesia, and that's not something you can just do, especially not in as controlled of a manner as shown within the students of Hope's Peak. They all lost their memories of everything between when they arrived at Hope's Peak and when the killing game began, aside from Kyoko, who basically had her entire memory wiped. That's a bit hard to believe without any explanation whatsoever, yet the game just doesn't give one and insists you believe it because they said so. What happened in the year between the tragedy and the killing game, and why did Junko and Mukuro wait a whole year to start the killing game? Well, it's assumed from the interviews that they all lived there in the bunker they turned the school into, with a daily stock of fresh food being delivered straight to the kitchen every morning, as well as supplies in the warehouse. But how exactly does that work? Where did the supplies and food come from, and how is it all getting in and out of the school? Why do none of the students question this and see if they can use whatever is restocking these things to escape? What's really going on in the outside world? Junko shows some clips that appear to show the entire world driven into chaos, having been taken over by Monokuma, but if that's the case, again, how do the supplies get restocked? I know Junko ain't making all this shit by herself while controlling Monokuma and watching the students. Oh yeah, and you never even find out what happens after everyone leaves. Let's talk about that ending. Junko is cornered by Makoto, giving hope to all the other students, and she lets the gang go free, but not until she executes herself by mimicking every other execution you saw throughout the game. She leaves them with the remote to open the hatch and escape the school, and Makoto and the others sit there and talk about pressing the button for like 15 minutes. At this point, I was just laughing at how stupid this whole thing had gotten. Like, after all that, you're really gonna hesitate? Sit there and talk about it? Just go already! Even after the air purifying machine turned off, they still just sit there and talk before finally opening the vault to see nothing. You never get to see. It's like the Jack 100% ending all over again. One more question. How did the air purifying machine turn off? It wasn't controlled by the button, as Makoto hadn't pressed it yet, and Junko was most certainly dead. There's really no going back on that one. Like I mentioned before, a post-credits scene shows that Monokuma is still alive after they all leave, so presumably there's someone else there to still control him, but turning off the air purifying machine would not be a very smart move for them, since they would need the purified air in order to, breathe. I know I keep going on about the plot holes, but this is the conclusion to the game, and it leaves so many unanswered questions. The ending somehow doesn't explain the backstory enough, while dragging on for way too long, thanks to Junko's hour-long exposition dump. I was bored out of my mind and wasn't even getting the answers I wanted, and the absolute slap in the face of not even getting to see what happens when the students leave Hope's Peak just made me feel like the entire last case was just a waste of time, especially since the murder-related part of it was super obvious and, like I said, basically just a formality at that point. Case 6 just falls so flat, and the terrible ending basically ruins the entire plot, which is a damn shame because the plot is the game's best aspect. Presentation is solid with a pretty good soundtrack that does ambience very well but is lacking in memorability, as well as an interesting visual style that looks a bit off when it comes to human characters but succeeds in all other areas pretty well. Gameplay is an absolute mess, with every aspect being flawed in some way, from the free time structure not being suited to the game axing off characters every so often and token searching being poorly executed, to the trials being filled with horrible minigames and other minor issues that really bring the experience down. The characters are very mixed, with half the cast ranging from almost good but flawed in some way to just downright terrible, and the other half ranging from okay to a few of them being actually good. The cases are also mixed, with many being either too easy to figure out or just not really making sense in some parts. While a couple cases really do nail it, the majority just don't quite get there, with cases 4 and 5 being the best and cases 1 and 6 being the worst. The overarching plot offers the most intrigue of anything else in the game, with genuine mystery and a slow drip feed of information keeping the story engaging until you start getting big chunks of lore around Case 5. But even this is ruined by a horrible ending sequence that's filled with unanswered questions and left me completely unsatisfied. With all that said, I do see the potential in this game, but the execution is lacking in every single area. This brings me to my conclusion. Danganronpa, to me, is just a lesser Ace Attorney. The one aspect it has going for it that would give it the edge over Ace Attorney is its overarching narrative, and that gets butchered in the ending. Ace Attorney features better art and music, a more refined gameplay and structure, better characters, more interesting murder mystery cases, and even manages to work in a good overarching plot in some games, though it typically doesn't really affect the game until the last case, thus being the one area where I believe Danganronpa has the upper hand, at least in theory. I know some people will get mad at me for making the comparisons, but once again, Ace Attorney is my closest frame of reference, and throughout the entire time I was playing Danganronpa, there was this constant thought in the back of my mind that I just wished I was playing Ace Attorney instead. Before anyone gets mad about this video and starts flaming me in the comments or something, I want to explain something. This entire video is all just my opinion. I know that's going to seem obvious to most of you, but I want to qualify that this review is not meant to put people down for liking this game. I know this franchise has a very strong and dedicated fanbase, and even though some of my friends who do like Danganronpa have told me the first game is pretty weak, I know that this game still has its fans. If you're one of those fans, That's great. I'm glad you could see something worth enjoying in this game that I didn't. That's not to say I didn't enjoy anything about this game, as I've explained throughout the review, but you get the point. Before any fans accuse me of hating on this game or attacking Danganronpa fans or anything like that, please know that the intention behind this review is not to do that. After all, I was paid to do this review. I didn't go and do it of my own accord. Thanks to my Patreon, I was given an opportunity to give this game a fair chance and evaluate its strengths and weaknesses for myself. I did just that, and what I've explained throughout this review was my opinion. If you don't agree with my opinion, then by all means, add your voice to the pool. Make your own review. Tell people why you love this game and what it is that you see in it that I may have missed. No game is perfect, and no game is for everyone. Danganronpa just wasn't a game for me, and that's okay. So, would I recommend this game? Well, no, not really. It doesn't offer much that makes it worth playing in my opinion. If what you've seen here interests you, go for it. If you like it enough, maybe you'll get something out of the sequels, which I've been told are better games, but really you'd be better off picking up the Ace Attorney trilogy on 3DS or modern consoles for a similar experience with a much better execution. With all that said, I hope you got what you wanted out of this review, Noah. This is by far the biggest review I've ever made and probably ever will make for a very long time, so I hope it was worth your $50. If you want to support me and my work, check out my Patreon in the end card or description, and if you're new to the channel and haven't watched my other reviews before, I just wrapped up a full marathon on the Wario Land series, which you can find in my reviews playlist. And consider subscribing and all that shit. Stay tuned for the next marathon, coming soon.